All right, everyone, this is more of a sort of an opinion video on politics than specifically and solely current events, which is on DACA, because that's going to be going before SCOTUS. It looks like the Supreme Court. There's been some talk from some of the left-wing justices about mafeals, which indicates, of course, they're going to rule against Trump and say, no, you're not allowed to cancel the DREAM Act. Yes, it's within your authority, but, you know, mafeals, so we're not going to let you anyway because some precedent from the 1800s. That being said, it really comes down to a couple of the more moderate justices like Roberts, who is a globalist, so that's not a great sign. Ultimately, at the end of the day, I think they're going to let him cancel the DREAM Act, to cancel DACA. They should. And here's why. Because Trump has shown no actual proclivity. The idea of Trump as a hardline nativist has never been true. All we've seen is him enforce existing immigration law and try to defend the border. That's not a hardline view. It's not a fanatic view. In fact, it's a very centrist view. It's center-left, oddly enough, what he's been stressing. His statements on the border, on deportation, on immigration reform are basically the same as the sort of things that were said by candidate Hillary when she was running the first time, by Obama when he was running, by both Republicans and Democrats for some time, and arguably is less drastic than some of the things we heard even back in the 80s or in the 90s. We're not talking about ancient history. We're talking about like the Clinton era. Only a few administrations ago, some of the things that were said are arguably more nativistic in some senses than what Trump said. The only difference between the Trump administration's actions and words on immigration and the actions and words on immigration in the past are the words are identical, but there is action. That's the difference, and that's really what pisses his opponents off. All sorts of presidents, from the Reagan era on through, all of them have stressed the need to tackle the immigration problem. Illegal immigration. We've got a bad border situation. There's a border crisis. Migrant workers, people getting paid for illegal labor, human trafficking, cartels, drugs pouring across the Mexican border. We've heard it time and time again from president after president. It doesn't seem to matter whether they're far right and therefore Hitler, or far left and therefore an acolyte of Marxism. They're all saying the same thing. It's just that they never did anything. The last time that there was an attempt to solve the situation was with Reagan, with Stimson-Mazzoli. The only problem is that it never led to a border wall. Several times now we've had money allocated, bills passed to defend the border, to make a better, protection there, to keep people out who are illegally here. And it always falls through because subsequent administrations stop the work, or it's, and this is usual with government, it's behind schedule and over budget. With Trump, that doesn't so far seem to be the case. Initially, Trump supposedly was a failure on immigration because he's not getting his wall, ha ha ha. And it was funny to see all the Coulterites say, he's sold us out. Yeah, he decided he wasn't going to override the Ninth Circuit unilaterally, leading to a major constitutional crisis that would cause his removal from office. What a sellout, what a terrible man he is. He's actually respecting the balance of power within the country and working through the various legal recourses he has, namely fight its way to SCOTUS, which he did, and he won. He's won over and over. He's got the money, he's got the land, the wall is now going up. I don't care if it's possible to undermine the wall with the right kind of saw. Yeah, of course it is. It wouldn't matter what the barrier was. Of course it can be undermined. Give a person enough black powder or enough other explosives and they can blow a hole in a wall that's 20 feet thick. That doesn't mean that building it's a bad idea. Here's the thing. You've got a modular, easily repaired double wall in some places. Cutting through one layer of wall isn't going to do you any good when it immediately alerts authorities when you get near it. That's the finalized wall. It'll work. Largely, it'll be successful. If it's defended and if it's completed. Trump is speeding ahead on this. He's going to be setting up probably for another battle, in his next term, if he gets one, to complete the rest of his project. But I think it'll be pretty formidable in the end. Let DACA get taken down by SCOTUS. Let Trump do away with DACA, putting, what is it, 700,000 people potentially in a gray area. Let him do that. He will immediately pressure the Democrats for a deal, and I imagine that the deal would be something like this. Yeah, the Dreamers, as long as they are non-violent offenders, they're not felons, repeat offenders, whatever, as long as they've kept on the straight and narrow, which is part of the DREAM Act's own provisions, by the way, as long as they're keeping to those DREAM Act provisions. They studied here, They've been employed. They're paying their back taxes. They're paying their debt to society if they have one, Social Security and so forth. They've been lawful. They've learned the lingo. They're basically the same as a de facto temporary resident. They've already, spent time. They just never filed the paperwork because they weren't able to. Trump, I think, will show certain classes of those individuals, especially veterans and students, leniency. The rest will be deported, which they're supposed to be. They're in the country illegally. Oh my God, it's such a terrible crisis. You mean the axe murderer over there might have to be deported? The Democrats apparently don't want that. They'd rather the taxpayers put them in a U.S. prison. I'd rather just deport them. Here's the thing. There are other illegals within the country. I think he'll tie that in, the accepting of certain dreamers, with a crackdown on sanctuary states and cities, which he's pushed for before, and that's a good idea, and with additional funding for his border wall, the next round, because this 500 miles that he's talking about funding now isn't enough. It's only halfway there. He's pretty much fulfilled his initial campaign promise. It's just that it's going to take a few extra years. He'll need a second term, which I think he'll get. SCOTUS should shoot down DACA. Let him rip DACA apart. Put the Democrats' toes to the fire. Deferred action does not mean we will never take action. Deferred action means for right now you're our lowest priority because we've got a border crisis. Well, nobody ever tackled the border crisis. Of course you needed a DREAM Act, but the idea was you would pass the DREAM Act so that these individuals that are otherwise being lawful, they really do honestly, genuinely want to contribute to American society. You put them on the back burner and say, look, I'm not going to kick you out of the country because I don't have the resources and honestly, you're not a threat. I'm focused on people that are cartel members and fixing the wall. But no wall was ever fixed. There's the problem. It's just like Stimson-Mazzoli. You almost got there, but the final provision that actually solves the problem more or less long-term was never implemented. Sometimes the Republicans, and now unfortunately even Democrats, ramble about E-Verify. I oppose it completely. The idea that you have to give all sorts of biometric data and bullshit like that in order to get a job is crazy. It's authoritarianism, and we don't need it. Why don't you just dismantle some of the welfare state and build a border wall, and then fewer people will overstay visas anyway if there's no welfare to be had out of it? There are plenty of people who would love to saw their arm off to come to the United States legally, and the Democrats have ignored them for years. The legal immigration system, do you realize that it's basically a jungle of hoops and hurdles and paying off bureaucrats, right? Thousands of dollars and several years later, you might get temporary residency. There are very few ways around this. Well, I mean, I think that that's a pressing problem that we might want to tackle. Maybe Trump can tack that in as well. By the way, I think he would go more with the Democrats on the issue. He's talking about ending the terrible lottery system we use. By the way, why is it that we need migrant labor in the first place? It's not like there aren't unemployed Americans. When people say, well, Americans won't pick apples for minimum wage. Oh, so you're saying that you have no problem with exploiting foreign individuals for work that Americans wouldn't want to do. Why not just fucking mechanize it? Pass a subsidy. You Democrats love those. Problem solved. No more problem. Be like every other modern agricultural society. Use machines to do it or something. Dude, there are drones now that can pick apples. There's no problem. It's like the Democrats, literally, I expect them to release ads saying, like, who will wash my windshield in the morning, or some stupid, crazy, literally racist shit like that. It's hilarious. SCOTUS should shoot down DACA. Let Trump handle it. The idea of him as this Nazi boogeyman that hates third worlders and he hates non-white people. He only likes white, straight Christian males. That's a mythology. It's always been a mythology. A mythology that literally nobody spun about him until the election. Until then, as propaganda kicks in, they thought Trump was a great guy. Oh yeah, he's fairly progressive and cares about the inner city because he has to live in the inner city. He's like, a pretty cool guy. He's hanging out with the Al Sharptons and the Clintons. All of a sudden, he became like the next Hitler, but only when he ran for office. It's amazing how that happened. All of a sudden, he started sounding like David Duke or something. No, he didn't. No, if anything, I think that he doesn't give a shit about such things. But he understands economics, presumably understands that if you flood the country with millions and millions of new people, it won't work. Under the Democrats' plan, we'd have like 20 million new welfare recipients that would also be getting, by the way, free healthcare and education. We wouldn't even have a border. It'd collapse the economy. It's not a way forward for GDP growth, especially when obstruction prevents any legalization of those individuals through the legislative process anyway. Obama already failed at executive amnesty once. That genie's been put back in the bottle. SCOTUS already made its decision. The next Dem president's not going to be able to sign a piece of paper and grant people residency in this country. It's impossible. It's a legislative power. And in some cases, a judicial power, which appropriated by SCOTUS itself in many cases. No, Trump's not a bad on the issue. Trump is a moderate on the issue of immigration. There are a lot of people who wish he was more hard line on it. There are a lot of people, the actual Nazis, the actual far-right extremists, by and large, don't support Trump on immigration. If anything, they see him as the lesser evil. In some cases, they're so black-pilled, they oppose him out of a false sense of accelerationism. So, when all these people only pay tacit lip service to some things Trump does are okay, but on immigration they completely oppose him. Yeah, he's got some moderate proposals. I think I might even be more hardline than whatever he would hammer out in the end. He'll make a big ask. He'll make a big spooky far-right ask about mass deportation and cracking down and billions for more walls and stuff. The Democrats will freak and balk, and then he'll say, okay, well, what's your proposal? And then it'll get more moderate. That's the way that these things are. That's how statehood actually works. That's how government worked before it was completely dysfunctional. One person suggests this, the other person suggests that, and they come together. Some proposal is made, some sort of sane compromise is eventually hammered out. Now, that's not always a good thing. Compromise isn't always universally a healthy thing. Sometimes you should stick to your principles. But on this, if you want to solve the problem and not just kick the can down the road like every administration since the 80s has done, eventually some compromise, some super deal has to be made. That's about all. Peace out.